Welcome to the Positive Impact Podcast, where we dive into the world of movers, shakers, and changemakers, creating a positive impact on the world. This is your host, Alexandra Black-Pollock, and together we're going to tackle real issues, discovering how we can make the world a better place. Joining us today to further drive home how far-reaching the impact of Compassionate can be is Burrell Poe. Burrell spearheads outreach and education for Compassionate in Chicago inner-city schools. He is the true definition of boots on the ground as he drives forward this incredible mission of compassion. Burrell, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Why are you so invested in this idea of compassion?
Well, I truly believe that compassion is the antidote to violence. And our societies are incredibly violent. And I believe that in order to stop violence, you need to build more compassion.
That's so great because it's very true. When you're really compassionate and have empathy and care for others, you're going to be less inclined to kind of act against them.
Right. It's the absolute key. So compassion as a word, it's a Latin word, and the roots of it mean to suffer with. And it's a very serious word, but when you think about it and when you employ it and bring it into your daily life, it's just that you're able to understand that suffering is universal. So it's something that we all deal with, no matter who we are, no matter what our race, our class, our nationality, our gender, we all deal with suffering. So it creates a sense of commonality in that we all have something in common. You know, I know that everything is not perfect in your life, and you know that everything's not perfect in mine. And I want to do what I can to help you. And hopefully that inspires you to do what you can to help me. And it's just beautiful.
To suffer with. I'd never heard that definition. Thank you so much for bringing that into perspective, because that is exactly the type of thinking that Sarah, when she started this movement, wanted to employ into others. Oh, compelling. So what exactly is your role with Compassionate?
So I do outreach and education here in Chicago. So I connect with community groups here in Chicago and tell them about Compassionate. But I also help write curriculum. So there's curriculum up on the Compassionate website for you to check out that teachers can use in their classes to help their students understand compassion and bring that value into just kind of how we're trained in being citizens. But I also work with adult groups to teach compassion from a class that I learned at Stanford.
When you and I connected before, you shared with me a compelling reason why Compassionate is so essential for what's going on in Chicago right now. Can you share a little bit of background on that?
Yeah. So here in Chicago, there's been an uptick in violence this year, and there's violence all around the city, and there's so many different issues and different things and elements that you can point to, but it all boils down to the lack of compassion. Chicago is one of the most segregated cities in the United States of America. So some people's Chicago is not others' Chicago. So everything is very isolated, and some people aren't participating in the progress of society as a whole, and others are, turning a blind eye to what's going on in other parts of the city. And there's just an utter lack of connection and community amongst different parts of Chicago. And that boils down to just a lack of compassion and empathy and understanding for each other's plights.
When you talk about this segregation, that Chicago is one of the most segregated cities in the nation, I'm not super familiar with this issue. So can you roll out a little bit more what that looks like?
Yeah. So if you look at a map of Chicago and You look at where the highest crime is, where you look at where the most people are murdered every year. If you look at wealth in the city, you'll see that it's not all together. There are pockets of extreme poverty in Chicago and pockets of opulence in Chicago, and they're very far away from each other. In Chicago's history, there was a lot of very uncompassionate practices and very mean and hurtful things being done, such as redlining, where banks wouldn't give loans to certain type of people who wanted to move to other neighborhoods, and give this process 20 years to work its way into the landscape. And you have communities of one race, one economic level, and you have other communities of one race and another economic level. And this is something that's plagued Chicago's history for a long time now. And it was very planned and very intentional at the time of its design. Now we've moved to a space where that's not as acceptable, but we're still dealing with the problems of that terrible past.
That really is such a turbulent history that Chicago has. Kind of, what are some of the lasting effects that you're seeing as you're working in these inner city schools?
Yeah, and so you find that these cities in Chicago. In Chicago specifically, there's a huge achievement gap between schools and poor communities and schools and wealthier communities. Chicago is home to some of the best schools in the nation, highly ranked, highly regarded, but it's also home to schools that aren't doing so well. And Chicago went, through an unprecedented act, closed 55 schools in Chicago because they were underperforming or because they were underpopulated. And it was something that had never been done before. And these schools were in majority poor neighborhoods. And poor neighborhoods directly correlates with African American and Hispanic because the city is extremely segregated. So it was an unprecedented move. As a matter of fact, Ta-Nehisi Coates, who wrote the famous Atlantic article, Case for Reparations, actually didn't really believe in the core argument of his theory for reparations until he came to Chicago. He's originally from Baltimore, and he came to Chicago and was just like, I cannot believe that the persistence and terribleness of the segregation here is an absolute disaster. So it shows up with high crime, violence, underperforming schools being closed down, and just a wealth of disparity between the Chicago experience of certain populations.
With all this absolutely unbelievable disparity going on in Chicago right now, what role does this compassion program even play into helping address just completely far-reaching issues?
Yeah, so I find that my work in the community in exposing people to compassion is that despite the challenges people in certain communities face in Chicago, compassion is a value that can move you beyond some of the normal pitfalls of facing enormous struggles as a community. And violence and crime and people hurting one another tends to be one of those things that correlate with being isolated as a community. But compassion combats that narrative and helps people build community in spite of socioeconomic circumstances. And with compassion, it also helps build a bridge between communities of haves and have-nots, because it helps people from feeling animosity and hate for one another, and it builds that connection in that community. So it helps the community come together as a whole, as they are, and then helps that community connect with other communities through the shared value of compassion. And it also works as a way of alleviating some of the pitfalls of being isolated socioeconomically, in reducing violence and people's reaction to hurt one another.
Talk about your ultimate grassroots program right there. Phenomenal. So when you're taking this program and really working with these students or in these communities, how have you seen it reshape their outlook?
Yeah, so I worked with a group of middle school students in Chicago, and it was a tough group. They were a tough group for us, and we didn't really know how they were going to take this idea of let's introduce compassion. And we're working with this group of students, and then there was one in particular, Tyler. And he would always just kind of act up. He would walk out of the classroom, just really tough to deal with. So then we started talking about compassion. When we started off with this exercise of what's the difference between compassion, between empathy, sympathy, and compassion. And the students all had a definition for empathy and sympathy, but no one knew what compassion was. They're like, what?
Really?
I've heard that term before, everyone's heard compassion before, but like, can you define it? And it's just like,
Wow, what an experience talking with these junior high students going, do you know what compassion is? By the way, this is the cool new thing on the block, so you should get on board.
Right? Like, this is what's hot now. So they were really interested. So we just talked about the differences, and this was kind of some of the they were very attentive, because here's some new material. It's not someone saying, hey, don't do this, or don't do that, or stop walking out of the room. But it was just really like, let's have a conversation and a discussion about something that's new and interesting. And I gave the students a bracelet, and they were so happy. They were so excited that they started having competitions of who can, be the most compassionate, or like, what did you do that was compassionate? So it was a really beautiful thing to watch. And it had an impact.
That had to be the coolest moment ever, when students start having a competition on who's more compassionate. As an educator, that's like your I've made it moment.
Oh, definitely. It was a beautiful thing to see.
So with Tyler, once you started implementing these measures and explaining, here's what compassionate is and here's why you want to be it, how did his behavior change?
Yeah, so so the organization that I worked for, MICFA Challenge, they teach community organizing skills to students. So it's the whole idea of the after-school program was to find problems in their school and work with each other as a group and the authority at the school to make a change. They actually chose bullying. They did a survey in the school and found that bullying was one of the biggest problems in the school. And they worked with their principal to create a curriculum called to implement a curriculum called Be an Upstander. And upstander is, instead of watching people bully one another, to actually stand up for people who are being bullied. And it's a great program. It was put together by Facing History. However, the critical element in getting people to care about bullying or feeling brave enough to be an upstander is to have a discussion about compassion and what is compassion. Because compassion, one of the barriers of compassion is that people believe that it makes you weak, and that, compassion means that I see, something sad and I don't know how to deal with it and I cry all the time, or, to feel mopey. But compassion is actually the opposite. It is to stand up to suffering and accept it as a way of life, and then feel compelled to help. In that you see someone being bullied, and you feel compelled to help them. As that's a compassionate response. And because of our discussion about compassion, Tyler was able to understand why you need to be an upstander and the value behind being an upstander and standing up for what is right. And his behavior, and even the principal noted it, that his behavior had changed throughout our work together as a team to do this training. He actually led the training in front of other students. And he had a reputation of being a trouble student, but everyone was pleased to receive his message of standing up to bullying. And compassion was the root of why he cared.
What an absolutely beautiful reframing of the word of compassion, from being this really weak kid on the block to, no, this is how we're empowering you to stand up. And then to have students adopt it like that and actually start demonstrating in front of other students. This really is a powerful movement.
Yes, it definitely is. And seeing these small successes definitely keeps me motivated and staying connected with the compassionate movement, because I truly believe that this is what we need to change the world.
I'd like to take a moment, and I'm curious if there's ever been a time when someone else's compassion helped change your life or impacted your life.
What just came to my mind now is that in basic training, so I'm off in Oklahoma. I go through basic training, and I'm right in my family, but I'm all the way in Oklahoma, so there was no way that they would have been able to make it out to my graduation from basic training. And I had spoke to a business leader in Oklahoma. Her name is Liz Hunt. She was from Chicago, and we just kind of bonded over, here's what I'm doing, here's why I'm in the service, and just I'm in Oklahoma. And they just kind of came and spoke with us, and a week before my graduation, she writes me and she surprises me and says, "I'll fly your family out to your graduation to see you graduate in Oklahoma."
Oh my gosh!
It was completely unexpected, and she flew my family out. Every once in a while, when she's back in town during the holidays, she would come to my house and visit my family and I. And yeah, but it was just such a random act of compassion. Like, she didn't have to do that, but I was so happy to see my family, because I went through a rough few weeks. I mean, that's what basic training is, and it was just amazing. But what she did was, I'll never forget it, and we still stay connected to this day.
How powerful to have somebody fly out your family for your basic training celebration. I can't even imagine.
Yeah.
Oh, Burrell, thank you so much for joining us today and really showing us the full circle impacts that compassion can have on individuals, from that one-to-one connection to building communities to hopefully helping to redefine some of those issues that are currently going on in Chicago.
Yeah, thank you for your work and sharing it with everyone. It's amazing.
Looking forward to it. As you know, I wear my compassionate bracelet every single day, and I have been much more mindful about building that compassion element into my daily life. So thank you guys for that.
Thank you.
Well, there you have it, the full circle of compassion, from that small moment when you're with somebody and you just take a moment to say, what if I were in their shoes, to those big, amazing acts of generosity where you fly a family out to attend a basic training. I hope you're inspired, and I hope you're ready to apply this idea of compassion to your everyday life. To hear about all the resources mentioned today, head on over to our show notes page at positiveimpactpodcast.com/episode 7.5. To hear inspiring stories every single day and connect with other movers and shakers, head on over to our Facebook page at facebook.com/group/positiveimpactcommunity. Until next time, keep doing your part to make the world a better place.